Hey babe, Faye here. Welcome to a new episode of Between Me and the Ink. Today I want to talk about things to grieve. You see, we all know to grieve when we lose a loved one, but there are so many other things that register as significant loss, and not making the time or even allowing ourselves to grieve for those things kind of results in an accumulation of negative feelings that put you in a really bad spot, basically. I had to do another deep dive into my emotional experience, and I found a lot of anger and anxiety and frustration and fear. I was withdrawing and I was also very irritated. And these are all secondary emotions, so I had to dive a little deeper and I landed on grief, which was a little surprising to me because it's been a while since I actively grieved something, and yet I have been through a lot of experiences that genuinely register as loss. And that brings me to the conversation that I'd like to have with you today. The definition of grief is very limiting because you imagine that you're only supposed to feel that heavy sadness when someone dies, or when you go through something monumental, like maybe you lose a limb or a job or something like that. Some people don't even grieve when they end a relationship, which for me, it's just insane. Like the whole conversation about kuoga na kurudi soko for me is very wild because that's a significant emotional experience, at least if you are actually into the person you've just parted ways with. So how are you not in need of healing? How are you not taking time to grieve? How are you not registering the loss? Anyway, it's wild, but that's not the conversation today. Today, I just want to give you a random short list that is honestly not so short of things that I believe you should grieve for if you experience them. And I will not sit here and purport to know what grief should look like for you or what counts as grieving in your experience, because as much as there's a scientific explanation of what grief is and how it manifests and what it does to us, I think the experience of it is very personal. What might give you catharsis might not work for me. So this is a list of the things that are allowed to trigger grief, to trigger a deep sadness in you. And the objective of this episode is to validate, so to speak, any instance where you have felt a heavy sadness and maybe rushed to brush it off because you thought it's not worth the heaviness that you are feeling, or maybe you felt like you're not allowed to feel as much as you felt in that situation. So consider this me saying you are actually very, very valid in all of your heaviness when you experience any of these things, okay? So thing number one is a bit obvious. If you go through a divorce, a separation, or a breakup, I think you're allowed a lot of time to grieve, especially if it was a long relationship, but I also realized that sometimes the length of the relationship has nothing to do with how deeply it sits with you when it ends. So if you're feeling heavy after ending a relationship, even if it is a very short one, please feel it, accept it, acknowledge it. Like, your feelings are very valid. And I would like to also state that I am not sure about talking stages and sneaky links because, one, I am a millennial. What is a talking stage? What do you mean? And two, sneaky links are very complicated because, one, as much as you're going to feel grief when it ends, there is a lot of other problems that you're going to be experiencing at that point. Because first of all, while it was happening, were you acknowledging what you were feeling for this person, or were you just pretending that you don't care, that there are no strings attached. Like, I feel like when a sneaky link ends, there's way more to process, basically. And I don't think grief is at the top of that list, but I digress. Thing number 2 is when you lose anything that matters to you. And sometimes this can be as dumb as burning your favorite dress. I remember there's a time I had bought this very well-fitting pair of jeans, and if you know the struggle, you know it. So I took my clothes to get laundered, and when they came back, the pair of jeans it had been pulled. I don't know how to explain it, but there's a part where the fabric was stretched, so it was a bit wrinkly and thin, while the rest was just fine. So whenever I'd wear it, I'd see that bump, like a wrinkly patch, and it looked terrible. So I had to get rid of the jeans, and that shit hurt. And I had no way of even complaining, because what do I say? In retrospect, I could have probably just called this person and explained to them what they had done to my jeans, and even if they could not replace it because it was a Levi pair, I should have at least communicated. For me, I just ghosted. I stopped taking my clothes to that person, and that was it. Sometimes when I'm looking for a pair of jeans in my closet, I feel that sting, because yeah, a well-fitting pair of jeans in the perfect shade of blue is an underrated blessing, to be honest. Now, thing number 3 is work changes. There are so many ways that this happens, and we just suck it up and move on. And I think you're allowed to feel the heaviness of it. Maybe if your workload changes, suddenly you have a lot of work, or suddenly you don't have enough work, or if your work situation changes. Maybe you are working from home and now you have to commute to work every day, or you are commuting to work and engaging with your colleagues every day, and suddenly everyone has to work from home and you don't see each other as much. Any significant changes in your work routine can mess with your mind, and it's okay if you feel it more than you expect to. Thing number 4, any serious diagnosis. I know that we often rally around people who are diagnosed with terminal illnesses, known terminal illnesses. But we live in a world where there are so many other health complications that are not considered chronic or terminal. And people usually experience this in silence, but it changes your life in one way or another. Maybe you'll have to live on medication for the rest of your life, or maybe you can't eat something that you used to enjoy eating. Shout out to the lactose intolerant people. Or maybe you're losing your eyesight, or your hearing, or your taste buds. I don't know. There are some things that would be considered trivial, but they mean something to you in terms of how your health is changing. And especially as you grow older, you realize that anything that has to do with your health makes you feel some type of way about your mortality. And yes, please, those feelings are very valid. Anything that counts as a loss in relation to your health as you grow older, that is emotionally tasking. So grieve as much as you need to, okay? Moving away from your loved ones it should be obvious, and yet time and again I realize that people try not to grieve when they ship out, and it's very puzzling because, dude, you've left everyone that you know and love, everyone that holds space for you physically, people that hang out with you, visit you, hold your hand, hug you, people that are there for you, and you're going to only experience them through a screen, probably for the rest of your life, or maybe for 5 or 10 years. So if that weighs heavily on your psyche, it's valid. Come on. It makes all the sense in the world, right? Thing number 6. Okay, now hear me out. When you get married, or when you get into a new relationship, you will experience a sense of loss, because the person that you become in a relationship or in a marriage is someone that has to let go of some things. I have had this conversation a bit lightheartedly with some of my friends that sometimes I miss my life before the life that I have now with my person. And we can laugh about it, we can make jokes about it and be like, you're being silly, or you don't mean that, or you should be grateful, you have an amazing relationship and all that stuff. But at the same time, you need to create space to acknowledge those changes that sometimes feel like they were important to who you are, because you're not that person anymore. The single you and the you in the marriage or the relationship will have some very significant differences, and it's okay to grieve that. The next thing I think you should grieve for is moving into or out of employment. I had mentioned earlier about changes in your work life, and I think this is a separate point, because sometimes when you're moving into or out of employment, there are very many things that change for you, especially financially. And it can be a good change, but it comes at a cost. Like maybe you're making more money, but you're working more hours, or maybe there's a lot more pressure, or maybe there's a lot more things to do generally, or a lot more stress, especially if you're moving into self-employment. So if that comes with sadness or heaviness, it is valid. The next thing is family issues. You can feel really shitty. People in your family are not in good terms. So it's okay if that weighs on you. It's okay if conflicts in your family make you feel at a loss in one way or another. Something that I think we also need to acknowledge as a potential cause for grief is a change in working conditions. I think at this point we all know how much the people you work with can affect how you feel about your work. So when that changes, maybe when your favorite colleague leaves, or when you get a new boss, or you get a new donor, and like it messes with your flow at work, it can come with heaviness as well. And that makes sense completely. A persistent change in your sleeping habits can cause you grief, because you're going to miss the days when you had a set time to wake up or a set time to fall asleep. So it's okay if you start feeling bad because you've not been sleeping the way you used to. Also, a change in your sleeping habits can mean there's stress coming from somewhere, which could be compounding the grief that you're feeling. So yeah, that's a serious issue. A change in your daily routines can also cause you grief. This is especially true for people who need structure within their days. Personally, I really struggle when my routines have been thrown out of work. The last few months that I've been struggling, a big part of that struggle was the fact that my days were no longer structured the way they were before. And I'm grateful for the time that I've had in the recent past, because I've been curating a wood workshop. So I have been spending my time constructively, but at the same time, I have still been struggling with a schedule, because you see, I can wake up at 6 in the morning and be at my desk writing, but I can't wake up at 6 in the morning and start banging on wood and stuff like that, and like using a saw or a sander. So it's like the space that I am in right now, it's more of transitional, because I'm still figuring things out, and it has come with a lot of transitional feelings, if I can call them that, because there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of concern, trying to understand, like figuring out how to proceed and stuff like that. You're allowed to grieve losing trust in someone. Like when someone disappoints you or does something that makes you lose your trust in them, you're allowed to grieve that, because that's a heavy experience. Then something more obvious is the end of a friendship. Most people like to act like, when you lose a friendship, you're like, it's good riddance, maybe they were not worth it or something like that. But this person was your friend for a reason. So please grieve, please accept that there's some pain involved. And okay, if there's no pain, then cool, like, okay. But if you feel bad after ending a friendship for whatever reason, even if you're the one who chose to walk away, especially if you're the one who chose to walk away, allow yourself to feel that pain, allow yourself to process the pain, so that when you're letting go, you're actually really letting go and not suppressing your feelings. You are allowed to grieve gaining weight or losing weight, depending on what your feelings are about whatever experience you've gone through. You are also allowed to grieve when you change your church or your religion. This is more for people who maybe stopped going to church or whatever place of worship they used to go to. I think since it's seen as an act of rebellion, there's very rarely an acknowledgement of the emotional experience that you're going through, because if you grew up going to church or any place of worship, it is deeply entrenched in who you are, and there's a lot of grieving you'll have to go through, because you are essentially moving away from who you are as a person into a new person. So there is a lot of loss for sure. You are also allowed to grieve a change in your social activities. For example, if you decide to become sober and you can't do shots with your friends anymore. But the truth is that you are changing in a very fundamental way. So if that comes with sadness, just accept it. Like, it is what it is. If you experience a change in your finances, that's also a bit obvious. You are allowed to feel all the sadness that comes with that. If someone around you commits suicide, that one is also obvious. You will feel a lot of pain, and you're allowed to feel that. Another common experience when suicide happens is that people feel guilty, among other things. So I think if someone commits suicide, I genuinely think that you should at least get one therapy session to focus on that, because the feelings around it can be very heavy and muddy and complicated. If you or someone experiences sexual assault, that also comes with a complicated mess of feelings. Like, a lot of things happen around sexual violence. I want to say especially for women, but I think men can be affected as well. So if you or someone experiences any kind of sexual violence and you find yourself balling up, like feeling intense feelings, that makes sense. This is becoming a little too long for my liking, but another thing that you should allow yourself to grieve for is anything that hurt you in the past. Even if you didn't acknowledge that hurt, you didn't recognize the pain in the past, maybe you didn't process what happened. If it's hurting you now, it doesn't matter how long ago it happened. You're allowed to feel that pain now. Anything that makes you feel like you've lost yourself, that is a valid reason to grieve. Sometimes even the losses of others around you, and this is it, when someone around loses a loved one, it hits you so hard, because grief is a universal feeling. The kind of grief of losing a loved one is a very universal experience. So it triggers all the grief that you've experienced before, all the people that you've lost before. The memories of them will come at you so hard. So please allow yourself that experience. Like, it's a part of humaning, right? This one is a bit heavy. You are allowed to grieve a past that you were never given. Whether it's something about your parents, your siblings, or your childhood. Whether it's about poverty or education or anything that you wish you had, or anything that you think right now that would have changed your life if you had it, whether in a small way or in a big way, you are allowed to experience that. I think the whole point of this episode basically is me saying, whenever you feel pain, allow it. Stop running away from your feelings, because at the end of the day, they always catch up. And when you suppress a feeling, it comes back in a very not so nice way, right? Lastly, you're allowed to grieve when a loved one is suffering, because whether or not you communicate it to them, whether or not they feel your support, when you love someone and you see them hurting, whatever is hurting, sometimes even if it's you who has caused that hurt, it will hurt you. Yeah? So allow that. Do not get so drowned in guilt that you invalidate your suffering, because, babe, if it hurts, it hurts. Let it hurt, okay? If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around. That's all I had for today. I hope you allow yourself the grace to feel all of your feelings this coming week, okay? Bye.